Welcome,
All
everybody.
right. Hello, everyone, and welcome to our webinar today. So my name is Lisa Harla with Heart of the Customer, and we have so much to share today. We're just going to jump right in and get started. So a couple of housekeeping items. First of all, this webinar is being recorded, and it'll live right here on LinkedIn. So if you want to watch the replay, if you weren't able to make it live, go ahead and come right back to this event, and it'll be available right when we wrap up here. So one more item is this webinar is live right now. So if you have any questions that come up during the conversation, please do comment those in the chat and we'll do our best to get to all of those throughout the discussion. So the more questions, the better. We love it when you ask what you have in mind. So don't be shy and feel free to comment away. And so with that said, let's go ahead and jump into our webinar. So this is the first of two webinars that we're doing on this topic, from vision to execution, building your customer experience dream team. So many of you know Heart of the Customer joined with the CXPA the past year to do a joint research initiative on the best practices for building a successful CX team. And so during this webinar, we'll share some of those foundational principles that we learned throughout that research. And then next week, we'll join again for the second half of those results. So with that, I'm excited to introduce you to our hosts today. We have, of course, Jim Tincher from Heart of the Customer, and then we're joined by a special guest today, Sandra Fornazier from Autodesk. So Jim, go ahead and take it away and kick us off.
All right. Thanks, Lisa. And there we go. Okay. Well, let's hop it off as we're calling this From Vision to Execution, Building Your Customer Experience Dream Team. And excited to be here. And one of the coolest things about my job, my background, for those who don't know, founder and CEO of Heart of the Customer, one of the first certified customer experience professionals on the board of the CXPA, overall CX geek. And in my job, I get the chance to meet the best of the best, the change makers, those in customer experience who are truly a step above the rest. And that's what inspires me. And so I'm excited today to introduce those who don't know Sandra to you. She's an amazing change maker at Autodesk. Sandra, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Oh my gosh, what a great intro. I'm going to frame that intro and play it at the beginning of every one of my meetings. Thanks, Jim. I'm so glad to be on this call. It's an honor to share some of the things I've learned along the way. I have been working in some form of customer experience strategy for probably over 20 years now. And specifically, I work for Autodesk today. It's been about 6 years, I guess, this spring that I've been working at Autodesk, which is a software company really producing 3D solutions, a very exciting place to be. I come from a very long background in telecom as well. And yeah, I'm excited to be here. I'm based out of Montreal.
Excellent. All right. And so this all came about a little over a year ago. We have a program called the CX Fellowship, has a half dozen of, again, more advanced CX leaders. And the setup is they share with us a problem they're experiencing. We'll bring in a national speaker who can address that issue. And I was thinking they would bring in things like, should we have a bonus for NPS? Some along those lines, or, the right way of measuring customer experience, how to incorporate operational and behavioral data to the analysis. And instead of any of that, they said, we want to know how we should build our CX team. And I said, well, shoot, because there is no national expert. And so I called Greg from the CXPA and talked about it with him. And he said, yeah, let's do some research together. Let's learn what great looks like when you're building your team. And so I'm going to start out with some of our research. Sandra's going to bring it to life with her experience at Autodesk. And so let's go ahead and hop into that there. So we interviewed 33 customer experience leaders. You can see all the different brands there. We have 24 of the pictures here. Some asked to be anonymous, but 33 leaders to really get a sense of what does it take to be a change maker. Now, you may be familiar with my book, Do B2B Better, where there I talk about the activities of a change maker. A change maker is the 23% of CX leaders who can actually show their program has impacted the business success. Today's a little bit different. This is more about how they act as a leader and how they build their team. Again, as Lisa said, the first set of results will be today. The rest will be next week. And next week, we'll talk more about how they structure their team. But one other key that's been thing's been really fun about this research is I got to work with my adult son, Jared, who did the analysis. And about 2 weeks ago, I asked him to sum up the research in one sentence. He thought about it. He said, well, you know the phrase customer experience leader. It's really about that. And it's asking, well, do you emphasize the customer experience part or the leader part? Because it makes a difference. Well, before we actually share what it is, let's look to some other sources. So what would Gartner tell us? Well, Gartner interviewed hundreds of CEOs and asked them for their top 3 initiatives over the next year. And what's interesting is you notice where the customer fit. We just asked to list the top initiatives. The customer items came in 9th. Only 8% mentioned it. But yet you'll notice in the others, like growth, for example, are highly customer dependent. But we start to get a clue here that if we talk about the customer, that's not where our leadership is listening. They're leaning more for the business outcomes. Now, to get another clue, let's hear from Tabitha Dunn. Tabitha just rolled off as the chair of the CXPA. She's the leader of customer experience at Hitachi, the 18th largest company in the world. And I had her speak at my Do B2B Better conference in September. Let's hear what she has to say.
But being a manager is very different than being a director. So how many directors do I have?
Oops. Sorry, I'm going to reshare that. Just make sure it's sharing with the audio. And, oh, there we go. Okay, it's on. Oh, no, it's, all right, here we go. Sorry about that.
But being a manager is very different than being a director. So how many directors do I have in the room? Right. So would you say that being a director is different than being a manager? Yes, yeah. Mm-hmm. The skills that got you the job are not the skills that'll make you successful in that job. Being a director is where it really becomes the most important to start learning how to win friends and influence people.
She was on to say that when she went from a director to a VP, she had a whole new set of skills. And then went from VP to a current role as head of customer experience for a global, huge company required yet a new set of skills. And so what we found is that we look at this phrase customer experience leader. Most focus on the words customer experience. But the great amongst us, the change makers, they instead really emphasize the word leader. And that, if we were to wrap it up in one sentence, is are you a customer experience person or are you a leader first? Because as a CX leader, you no longer have time to spend really diving down into the survey results. You probably can't spend as much time talking to customers. You need to become a leader first, customer experience second. And that's hard for us. Well, we found 3 themes within that. First of all, know your business even better than your customers. We introduced some tools for success, change management, specifically ADKAR and the maturity models. And then lastly, use all this to activate the organizations. Now, there's a lot left on the cutting room floor. In order to get this down to a manageable about 20 minutes to fit in time for Sandra, I know there's a lot more behind this. And we're also introducing today a white paper that'll go into detail. But let's start by knowing your business even better than your customers. To do this, you have to start with your stakeholders, lots of them. It's helpful to create a stakeholder map and use this to build lasting relationships. Let's hop there first of all about knowing your business. Now, we're all CX people. We would never imagine changing the customer experience until we talked to our customers and understood more about their needs. But for some reason, we often neglect to do that exact same thing to our business. And so Brian, I serve on the board with him. He's with AAA. He talks about how he does CX to his stakeholders, building those same levels of trust and confidence he wants his customers to have. Let's hear from first Tabitha, and then Sandra. We'll talk to her later on. We'll hear a video of her as well, talking about this whole about working across the organization.
The first place I turn my attention is learning the organization. So I spend a great deal of time understanding not just what our customers need and what do they want from us, but what does the business need and who are my key stakeholders and how do I help manage that function. And that sets my strategy, my direction, and how I engage in business, and also how I beg for money, because that's a really common part of my job.
So again, start with the inside first. We're always thinking outside in, and you need to, but you also have to work inside out. And then hearing from Sandra.
I think probably one of the most important lessons to learn is that you have to have a very strong stakeholder management approach. Who are your stakeholders? How do you convince them? What's your communication plan?
Again, start by your stakeholders, lots of them. And it's helpful to make a stakeholder map. And what this is showing by levels of support and levels of influence where your stakeholders land. And we have a white paper we're going to share with you at the end. We've shared it before that gives you more details on how to do this. But it's helpful to have this visual so you can see in this hypothetical, the CMO is a huge champion, but you notice the CFO is an active detractor. So it's a great activity to do to better understand where is your support coming from. And the last part then is to establish these lasting relationships. And we're going to hear from Gloria Gupta from the AMA and then Jim Bass a little bit more about how they build their relationships. Let's hear first from Gloria.
All of the glory go to the products and to those teams. And that's the fuel of what keeps us going. You know, initially, and this is sort of, this process sort of catalyzed over time where we would kind of poke the bear and see what we got back. And we realized that, you know, we can't come to the organization and say, hey, we need $5 million a year to upgrade products and go and change AMA's customer centricity, right? So what we ended up doing is coming to the bear and figuring out what the bear was doing and figure out a way of feeding it differently. So for a better outcome, right? Maybe that's a bad analogy, but and it's working. It's surprisingly working. We've had amazing results and have a pretty amazing relationship with the stakeholders.
We're going to hear more from Gloria next week as we dive into the different ways of structuring your team. She's actually going to be a case study for us there. But let's hear a little bit more from Jim.
So, you know, it's not always enough for us just to analyze data and say, here's what data is saying. Many times we have to go and work with those departments and find out more. And because they're not necessarily connected to everything we're doing and they have their own goals, you have to learn how to finesse that and create it. Not just, oh, we're going to collaborate. It's how can I help you? How can what I'm doing actually help you in your job, make your job easier, make help your employees feel more supported, more empowered, and not just put upon.
So at this point, you might be thinking, yeah, we need to talk to the business, Jim. I got that. I do that. What's the big deal? Well, here's what I found is that most CX leaders are trying to explain to the business why they need to focus on the customer experience. The change makers understand their stakeholders' goals, their KPIs, and are showing how customer experience helps them be successful, as Jim was talking about there. That's the critical difference. You don't start with your goals, your metrics, your outcomes. You start with theirs and show how a better customer experience helps them be successful. And that moves us on to the second part, which is tools to success, change management and maturity models. And specifically, I'm a huge fan of the ADKAR change model. And that is, if you want people to change, If, for example, you really feel that your support team needs a warm transfer when they transfer a call. Well, first of all, they need to be aware of the need to do that. They have to have the desire to do it. They have to know how to do it, about how to get it done. They have to be able to, and they need to keep reinforcing it. The number one change management methodology I found in over 200 interviews with CX leaders is not ADKAR, it's none. But the great programs are bringing in ADKAR as a way of driving change. So really that key thing, that hypothetical I had before, is most programs have an AKA approach. Hey, our surveys say that we need a better transfer process. Here's exactly what they're saying, the knowledge, and now let's focus on the ability to do that. But it's desire that's often missing. And that comes back again to knowing your stakeholders and tying it into their needs. When we talk about ADKAR, though, I've got three of my friends talking a little bit more about ADKAR. Starting with
over time, at Dow, we have adopted ADKAR as a methodology that you are familiar with, and we have basically decentralized those change agents and resources in the business, because ultimately the business is where we implement the change, and therefore we wanted those resources to be as close as possible to the end users and the people that actually have to go through that change curve.
Now, if you read Do B2B Better, and I hope you have, at that time, Dow had 3 change management members in their CX team. As Ricardo references there, they actually moved them out into the business now where they could see more change. Again, we'll talk about Dow next week as another case study, their case for the federated model. And then back from Tabitha again, and then we're also going to hear from Roxy, who spoke at Do B2B Better both years we've done it so far.
I built a whole change management certification network because, like Jim, I'm a big fan of ADKAR and ProSci. In fact, that's one of the things that I make certain that if you don't have it when you come to work for me, you will have it within the first 2 years, is you're going to be a change management certified.
With ADKAR, ProSci, and change management, somebody's going to get certified in that, or everybody's going to get certified?
You can see both of them have focused on having everybody in their team ADKAR change management certified. It's a critical skill. Another tool that's helpful is a maturity assessment. Now, we like to use the XM Institute's maturity model. Those who follow our webinars know a few months ago we had Hemi Chang from Marvin talking about their experience working through the maturity assessment. And it's helpful to understand where are you strong today and where are you weak. And that's why whether you use the XM Institute's model, whether you use a different one, it's helpful to assess where you're strong and weak in your program today as you build it. So we have those tools then. Let's get to activating the organization. And most groups want to start here. In fact, they usually want to start with unleashing your culture. But then they find themselves frustrated because they're not having any progress, usually because they skip these other steps first. You have to start by understanding your stakeholders, we talked about earlier, then bring in the tools, and now we can start activating, starting with the CEO and understanding his or her priorities, linking the back office to the front office, and only then are we really ready to unleash our culture. So let's start with the CEO's priorities. I want you to think for a minute, if you were to ask your CEO, who do they trust the most? Who are the executives that they most are going to depend upon in the next year? Now, IBM asks this question of CEOs every year, and I haven't seen them publish results for the last 2 years. We go back to 2021, the last I've seen it posted. Think, who do you think is going to be number one and who they trust? Well, the real results came back, and notice the CFO and COO are essentially neck and neck for number one. They could choose multiple. Next is the CIO. Now, many of us report to marketing. Notice where the CMO is on the list. And also notice who's not on the list. Is the Chief Experience Officer the Chief Customer Officer? Your leadership is focused on finance and operations. Technology comes in third. And let's go back to what we saw earlier, that that number 9th on the list was the customer. Yes, your CEO wants a better customer experience. Yes, they care about your customers. That's not where they're thinking. They're thinking about all the back office. So how does this impact your strategy? Now, I've done surveys in the past, and what I've found is that most CX people talk to finance maybe once a year at most. The change makers have a regular rhythm where they're talking to them monthly. And they could probably say their CFO's favorite brand of cookie or sports team because they're talking to them regularly. Most aren't. And so that comes in next to really connecting the back office to the front office. And so if you want to really impact your organization, and I've talked to enough of you to know that, yes, that's what you want. You want to get the whole company to focus on the customer. But what's a little surprising, in order to do that, you actually have to do it through the lens of finance, operations, and IT, because that's where your leadership is focused. So we're going to hear now from Courtney Warford from AGCO. By the way, she's actually going to lead a webinar in a month from now about integrating operations into your customer experience. Let's hear from her a little bit more how she goes about linking the back office to the front office.
It's not just, let me show you all the stuff it's going to enable. It's like, hey, I am so excited to partner with you because I have some great ideas in the IT space about how we can look at this digital handshake on the customer journey. And I would love your ideas on how we can do this. And then, and it gets them like, oh my gosh, I'm needed. Our skills are needed. And then look what can happen on the customer side. Because what I'm trying to build is a 360-degree view. And thinking, I would love your thought leadership on how we can go there, right? That's a story that gets them on board and says, well, how can we help this customer experience stuff? So, yeah, it's also a part of the telling the story is, it's not about you, it's not about experience, it's about how do you get people engaged in the work and how can you get them to see how they fit and why they matter to the customer experience? Because if they can draw a line of the work that they do to how it impacts ultimately the people that we serve, boom.
I had a chance to meet with Courtney about a month and a half ago, and she just got 9 new headcount for her team. It was a great way of showing the impact she's having across AGCO. Again, she'll be joining us here in a little over a month for a webinar on integrating operations with the customer experience. We're going to show two last, actually, unfortunately, these are audios. In the early days of our work, we had people being anonymous. Now, since then, Brandon and Gloria have agreed to let us use their name, but as a result, we only have audios of them. Now, Brandon will be joining us next week for part 2 of the webinar. We talk about different organizational structures. He has a centralized team. He's going to talk about how to activate the culture, and then Gloria will give us one last thought about how she does that. So let's hear from Brandon.
I have a set of people that I call them the experience champions, and those are functional leaders. So they all are heads of department, and we meet together monthly as a roundtable to talk about experiences across the board, and that could be recent experiences that we've launched to market. And so we talk about how are they doing? Did they have the expected outcome that we thought? We talk about current challenges that people are experiencing. They're each responsible for a phase of the journey. And I do use front stage and backstage champions just to kind of give that full picture of who's responsible for directly delivering the experience and who's responsible for supporting the delivery of that experience. So I have front and backstage champions. So we talk about those kind of current emerging challenges or opportunities for experience. And then we also work on things like prioritization. So as a team, they try to drive the priorities of the rest of the organization and how we might spend resources based on those experiences that we think are going to deliver the most customer and business value.
I've known Brandon a few years now, not as long as I know Sandra. I've known Sandra like, 8 or so. Brandon's part of the fellowship I mentioned earlier. And I love this approach he has. I'm going to spend 2 days shadowing him next week. So it'll be interesting as we come back together for the webinar in part 2. I may have some more insights to his program as a result of doing that. And now lastly, let's hear from Gloria. And you heard from Gloria earlier. I showed a preview to one of our clients about this, and they all said they want to be Gloria. They want to become Gloria. They love her approach here. Let's hear from her one last time.
Yes. But the CX champions, the stakeholders, are the people that are helping in advance. Those are 400 plus people who are responsible for marketing, communications, product design, product execution, across AMA's 13 product lines and 20 digital platforms. So those are the people that we have deeply engaged now and working to help advance goals. Our next thing is continue to improve the breadth and the depth, but the depth is really more senior management, more senior thinkers, leaders, so that, and ultimately, we want to see CX footprints within AMA's very tech strategic planning. So here we want to embed it within all the products and all the different areas, but eventually, so that eventually the footprint is way up. When we look at AMA's 3 strategic arcs, which are to remove barriers to healthcare, to improve chronic disease, and to speak with one unified voice, we want to see CX as differentiating value in the marketplace.
All right. Now, again, we have a lot more content here across our research, and that we are going to be able to get in a white paper, which we're releasing literally right now. It's coming out now. It's up on the website, and you'll get a link to this coming out of this email. And Lisa will be dropping in the chat as well. So now let's bring it to life with a real live change maker case study. So as I mentioned, I've known Sandra for 6-8 years through CXPA events, but through this research, I had a chance to sit down and learn more from a program, and I was blown away. And so we're going to spend about 15 minutes here hearing from Sandra how she builds her program, and then we'll open up to Q&A. So Sandra, welcome.
Thank you so much. I'm excited to be here.
All right. Well, let's start with, before we get into these pieces here, tell us a little bit about who's on your team. I know it's next week's content, but I'd like to hear a little bit more how you structure your team, because I know that's an extension of your strategy.
Yeah, sure. And by the way, I just had to say I resonated with so much of what was said by all those leaders. I mean, I was like, yes, preaching to the choir, I'm in. Our team, we're about 20 folks. I've created an organization where we have 3 parts of that organization. There is part of my organization that's really focused on insights. And more than that, the voice of the customer strategy. What is our listening post, our listening strategy? What's the technology that has to be in place? And how do we ensure that we work with the rest of the organization to ensure that the way we listen is also reflective of our brand? Because listening is also a very important part of the differentiation of any brand. The second part, once we get those insights, and we'll talk a lot more about that, I think, and how we connect them to the business strategy. But once we have those insights, we know that we are very partnered up with multiple organizations across the Autodesk. We're about 12,000 people at Autodesk. We know if there are specific insights that we think are going to be interesting to specific organizations, we can deliver them into them with confidence, because generally speaking, we're speaking their language. We understand where they're focused. We also understand that they have their own strategy. This is one very important input into their overall decision-making for their roadmap of the services improvements, the product improvements. But normally, if it belongs to one organization, they're the subject matter experts. They know what to do with this. They know where they're going. You're not there to do their job for them. You're there to give them another important insight into whether or not their strategies and their service and product improvements are having the impact they're looking for. And we trust them, of course. They're the experts in what they do. They will determine, how to apply change to that. Sometimes, though, those things you discover along the way can be very complex, and they can span many different organizations because they're a specific customer persona that is having a challenge across their end-to-end experience with the company, or their or a particular way to probably resolve it requires multiple organizations. Here we have an action management team who's really focused on bringing together the leaders of those organizations to help solve that problem, understanding the roadmaps together with them, determining whether we've got all the roadmaps in place to improve the experience. And if not, together building a business case for improvement if the investment is required. So that's a very complex, very stakeholder, very focused on bringing the conversation at the level of all of those stakeholders. And then the last piece is, okay, if we're off now fixing a complex issue or that really requires a redesign, I have an experienced design team who's focused on customer experience. What is that vision of the future state of that particular service, persona, experience that will really connect to how we want the rest of the rest of our customers to experience the brand. So we have a strong customer experience design team as well that is holistically trying to set a vision for that improvement so that we're not off building a bunch of disparate improvements that are not connected to how we want the brand to be perceived by our customers. And so those three portions of my team allow us to be quite holistic in how we do customer experience. We are not trying to do anyone else's job. We're trying to empower everybody with the right set of tools, insights, and also resources to be able to make a difference. So that's a large part of how we're built out. And by the way, we didn't start there. When I started in this particular company in customer experience, there were 4 of us. Our insights were not connected to the business. They were not necessarily connected back to the customer that provided the insight. So building that business case around why this is important and getting statistical relevance in our insights was almost impossible. We had to start at ground one to connect front to back office.
Well, so let's talk about that a little bit more, because we talk about your structure, your team. Most have an insights capability. I would argue they're not doing all that you're doing, but most have that. Experience design is not common necessarily, but not uncommon. That middle group, though, is fairly unique, and it is tied back to understanding very deeply the needs of the business. So how did you get that? How did you go about? We actually had to cut a lot of your videos out because we have you here live, where you talk about learning the language of the business and connecting to what they care about. Can you talk to us a little bit more about that?
Well, I think one of the lucky organizations that I ended up reporting into is the customer success design team, and this team is really responsible for thinking about the strategy of customer success. And it allowed us to really understand the business strategy. And actually, also our company hired for the first time ever a chief customer officer a few years ago, and who reports into the COO organization. So that allowed me to have a really good understanding and relationship with those who are setting forth the business strategy, and allowed me to open the doors and talk to our chief operating officer, our chief customer officer, our CEO, and really understand where are they going with the business strategy? How are they thinking about the business in the long run? And yes, of course, how are they measuring it through growth? They're measuring it through, recurring renewals, and allowed me to start thinking about how to change the language that we use to connect the insights, not to uncover some tragedy that no one knew about necessarily, but to help them align reconcile the feedback with getting to their business strategy. So those insights now allow us to have conversations about empowering them to get to their strategy faster and removing the roadblocks in decisions they may have made that are having backlash. For example, that better communication needs to happen to those customers, or a new service that has gone out that isn't really resonating. Well, we know how that's going to impact eventually the renewals of those customers. We know the personas within our customer base now, and we're able to talk about their impact and the business decision making to purchase and renew from us, and how those experiences might detract from their willingness to purchase again or to talk about Autodesk in a positive way. So by connecting the insights to risk to the top line revenue numbers, the top line numbers that our C-suite is looking at, that became very important for us. But the second piece we really needed to do was, okay, it's nice to say, hey, if I do this, I have this statistically relevant number of customers that are really challenged with this. This is the potential business impact if we don't solve, if we do nothing, and or today, that's probably, if we do something, could really turn into opportunity. It wasn't enough to talk that way. Then to the next layer of organizational leaders who actually would make the decision to make a change, to actually action those insights. We also had to understand for each organization, what are the KPIs that they're tracking to tell them whether or not their business is running, and to help them. And so those insights we're trying to connect are also at that kind of operational metric, things that the day-to-day mid-management is responsible for, and they're measuring. How can we help them with those KPIs by improving the experience? How will it impact those KPIs, and how will that overall experience and KPI then impact the business growth numbers, top level numbers? That was really critical. And the only way to do that, Jim, is to talk and not talk, actually ask. Curiosity quotient has to be really, really high. So we're forever trying to understand what's important to them, what are the roadmaps, how do they think about their business, so that when we're providing insights into an organization, it is connected to what they care about. It is in the language that they are reflecting on. That's really critical to drive action. Another big one for us is, we used to walk into, the C-suite and unveil oh, here's our NPS report and here's all these great insights. And it was so disconnected, and we spent all of our time presenting instead of asking questions about what they wanted to do with this and whether those insights were useful, and exploring how they were thinking about the results that they were looking at. We weren't doing that. We were just coming in, presenting, and leaving. And they were like, see you next quarter. That was really interesting. And no one gave it a second thought. So being able to really create sets of insights, connecting them to the business strategy, connecting them to the roadmap items that exist and those that don't, and the gaps, and being able to walk into a room and actually have a conversation instead of talking at people has totally transformed how we do business.
So one of the things I love about a lot there, so actually you pretty much summarized do B2B better right in your statement there, which the 4 actions of a change maker in the book are connect to financials, which you talked very specifically about that, renewal, so on. We didn't talk about measuring emotions. We don't have time to get into that today, but I know you measure trust.
Yes.
Third is measure the journey through the behavioral and operational data. And you talked about connecting to KPIs. And then lastly, use deliberate change management. So you nicely summarized the book, which is fantastic. You haven't seen it yet. Now, when I was talking to you earlier this week, I shared a comment from another board member, CXPA board member, where I asked him about how much time he spends talking to stakeholders, and he said 80% of the time. And what was your reaction to that?
I was 80, 90%. It feels like that's all I personally do. And the folks in my team, they are only successful. Even the folks who are analyzing data or the folks who are, doing experience design, they are only successful if they are having all those conversations as well. Doing any of that in isolation of just the voice of the customer, which is critically important, but understanding how to interpret all of that information, the sentiment that you're measuring, it has to be in context. It has to be in context of the overall business strategy of each organization, each department's strategy. And so if even your analysts are not able to access and actually talk to the business leaders, then you're in trouble. You're providing stuff that no one wants, that doesn't resonate, that's completely not relevant. And that's a really bad place to be. So I always ask myself, what's the purpose of my CX team? Is it really listening? Or is it about really helping our company achieve its business strategy?
Which is, I'm assuming, number two. I'm joking, but yes, obviously it is. And that's so critical. But you didn't start there, I'm sure. I mean, you came up from the trenches. You didn't, emerge as a fully fledged change maker, customer experience leader. Talk to me about those early days as you were moving away from doing the work to leading the work.
That was tough. I'm not going to lie. It was hard. It was hard not to get in the weeds and not constantly trying to recreate and test for validity. It was hard to let go and say, okay, the work that's being done is accurate. Like the whole micromanagement part was difficult. I will say that in every CX leadership team role that I've had, I've also spent time in other parts of the organization. So I was a software designer. I was a customer success person. I led a customer success management team. And so I think that allows me to be super connected with and believable with the business. But also I'm curious. I mean, part of it, Jim, is to trust your team. And the other part is to get curious about listening to the tough feedback from the rest of the organization on what your team is providing that's of use and not of use, and being willing to go back to the drawing board. So when you talk about sentiment, measuring sentiment, is NPS still the right thing? Should you be measuring other metrics that are more aligned to the business strategy? Is it trust? These are, to not be stagnant, you need to keep talking to stakeholders. And yeah, it took me to put on my big girl pants and, knock on some doors that maybe I thought I shouldn't have been knocking, and really having straightforward conversations with leaders, and then realizing that that's really what they wanted. I could bring in a perspective they didn't, but they could teach me so much about how they're thinking about their business that would allow us to be much more powerful. And the best thing I could do was then bring that knowledge back to the rest of the team if they weren't accessing those same leaders directly.
Excellent. I know some folks probably have questions. Feel free to put them in there, or I can just keep asking questions all day long. We stay till 6 tonight because I love this opportunity to be in front of you.
You didn't tell me I had to get a glass of wine, but I can.
Tell me, if you were to look at it, you saw the graph which said that the CEO relies first and foremost on the CFO, COO, and then after that, IT. Tell me a little bit more how you build relationships with those groups, because those groups, frankly, are scary.
Yeah.
I know you report up to operations, but that they feel a little intimidating because they speak a different language, they have different KPIs, they have different personalities. Tell me a little bit more how you engage those back office parts of the organization.
I mean, I think one of your videos said it best. It's not, I don't feel I need to know how to do something. I feel like I can come in and ask. And so I actually think finance is my best friend. Like, really? I can go in and talk to the finance leaders and really put it out there. Hey, I'm seeing this decline. I'm seeing these challenges. I'm getting all this customer feedback. Can you tell me whether it's impacting? Can you tell me whether this cohort of detractors are not growing as fast, or are not renewing as fast, or maybe are not consuming as much product as they should be, can you tell me? Because they have the data. And if they provide those insights into me and I give them all the information and they go off and do the analysis, then I can go back to the rest of the C-suite and be like, I worked with finance and they are the ones who told me that actually this is a challenge to our opportunity to grow as fast as we want to as a company. And that is so much more meaningful than the CX team trying to do it on their own and not necessarily utilizing the data, because there is not one company where data isn't unstable. Right? There's no company where data is like perfectly formed and you're going to go off as the CX team and do all the right back office correlation when you don't even understand how the data is structured. Let others help you with that. Work together, give them the data, guide them towards what kind of questions you're trying to answer. That's how we approach most of the data analytics folks outside of the organization. We tell them, here's the question we're trying to answer. How would you help us?
So let's go a little bit deeper into that whole engaging stakeholder side, because the language can be a little bit intimidating. You talked about it's really important to pick up that language. So are you getting the language from the C-suite, the VP level, the director level, the front level? Where are you engaging the organization?
Everywhere. No, but honestly, everywhere. I mean, I don't think you can. I try to get as much access as I can to our COO staff. This is really important because that encompasses our company is really divided into the COO leadership and the CEO leadership, which is product teams. And I also spend time with my team presenting into the product leaders and trying to understand how they think about their business. So to answer your question, Jim, I'm really trying to tackle all of it. I think that I need to really focus on probably the COO, CEO type staff. And I can always go through my chief customer officer, but she opens the door for those conversations as well. And then I try to go down a few levels, because you got to translate desire by your C-suite into action. And you're not going to get any action if you don't understand how the actual mid-level management and director levels, how they view their business and how they prioritize their business. So I think you have to do it all. I hate to say it, but that's as the CX leader, your job is to really connect up with all of those folks.
When I talk about the change management component of the model, it's one of the phrases I say is that middle management is where customer experience goes to die. And the reason for that is they got to be middle managers because they were promoted because they hit their KPIs well. And They focus on process. It's not a fertile ground for a customer experience revolution unless you can connect the KPIs. You mentioned you do that. I'd love to hear a little more detail about how are you actually able to connect customer experience to some of the KPIs of the middle management?
Yeah, I mean, we've done it in a number of different ways. And I think you really have to think about it as project by project. What is it that you're what's the experience improvement you're trying to land, and really focusing on those KPIs that are connecting to those KPIs for those organizations. And I don't know about other people's organizations. I'm pretty sure all companies have way too many KPIs. So there's not one KPI I can connect to that's going to fit every situation. So for example, right now I am we were spending a lot of time on the admin experience. So our software administrator experience is such that customers out there were having trouble assigning users, managing users, downloading software, and that technology manager in our customer base, I'm just being honest, they were having some challenges. Their jobs were full of effort. And so we started connecting with the the teams who would be working on those digital experiences to make those jobs to be done much easier. And understanding that they were measuring things more on clicks and like how many clicks am I going through to reduce number of to reduce effort, and understanding whether the number of clicks really translates to a happier customer with less effort. So it's more about rubbing up all of those numbers together and seeing where there's connection points. So if you're really focused on reducing the number of clicks, but you're not focused on guiding the customer through those clicks, you might not have made the effort better. So it's about analyzing that together, really understanding what makes the difference, and then putting together a roadmap that makes sense for the customer. But also turning it then into, they will normally know of their KPIs. Which ones do they mentally connect to? In our case, renewal rates or AOV growth, right? Growth of, revenue growth. Those are things that our company measures. Those middle managers are connecting their KPIs to those things. So focusing on the KPIs that they care about, that they're measuring every day for the performance of their business, that they believe are connected to revenue, to renewal rates, are the place to focus on, because you're not going to change their opinion of that, but you can help them achieve those KPIs.
100%. I remember we had to get, as I mentioned earlier, we had to leave a lot in the cutting room floor in terms of videos. One of the things Gloria talked about is one of the pieces of data she looks a lot at is channel switching. Now that's an area of both, it's bad for the customer, it's bad for the business because they're often switching from digital to analog. And she's using her surveys to better understand why are they switching, so we can inform, go back to those who have that KPI and say, this is what we understand about those who are switching from channels. And again, to help give the why. If I were to look at those who are not having impact, those CX leaders, it's usually because we think the score is NPS or customer satisfaction. The score is our data. But when I see the change makers like yourself, it's where our data is used to help inform the rest of the business about their data.
Yes.
To help them understand the why behind the what, and the what is in their data. We're giving them the why.
Yes. And in our example for around improving those admin experiences, those like just making it less effortful to like manage our software that you would buy, we were really able to align roadmaps, get some investment, roll out, not us, of course, those organizations were so bought in that they rolled out 35 features to improve the experience, to make it easier for our administrators of our software out there to improve their experience and make it easier. And then we went back and tested it. Guess what? It improved renewal rates. And so then it's all about their glory. We didn't do the hard work. They did the hard work. They are the ones who put out the right roadmaps, the feature, the focus. They didn't even really understand why that persona was such a detractor. We helped them understand the top areas of pain. They put in all the effort to build out the features. The NPS shot up 12 to 20 points in some of our cohorts for those personas. And then we were able to connect it to an uplift in renewal rates. After that, there's a lot of people knocking on the door wondering what else can Voice of the Customer help them with? How can we make other organizations the superstars of what they're already really good at, but take it to the next level so they really feel they're contributing to the business strategy as well?
Well, the most important phrase you say in there, I think, is we help them understand. So we're not coming with our own point of view. We're not coming with our data. We're saying, let's understand where you are. Let's help you understand what the voice of the customer has to say about it.
Yeah.
That's how we enable success. All right. I could go on for this forever, but you don't have the wine, and we are coming up on time. Thank you so much, Sandra. I really enjoy you being part of the research and part of our webinar today.
It was my pleasure. And I will say it doesn't happen overnight, right? It takes those conversations and you understanding the business and them understanding how you can help them with the business. But it does happen, and it's worth those investments into really understanding the business strategy and seeing CX as an enabler and not a tack on.
Excellent. All right. For those here today, thank you so much for joining us. As I mentioned, this is the first half of our research. And coming up next week, we're going to be talking about 4 different organizational structures we discovered in CX. The small but sometimes mighty, centralized, which is what Sandra has, distributed and federated, and walk through the concept of hiring specialists versus generalists and hiring from the inside versus the outside. Brandon will be joining us from American Modern Insurance as our case study next week. We also encourage you all to download the white paper. It just comes out today, goes into way more detail on our research and how to apply it. And I'm going to be speaking about this at the CX Leaders Advance, the CXPA conference coming up in late April. And Sandra, you're going to be there too, right?
Yes, I can't wait.
All right, excellent. So you get a chance to get her autograph, talk to her a little bit more about her program. Again, it's going to be coming up in late April, and we'll send an email out with a link to the recording and all the resources we mentioned here today. Again, thank you all for being part of our research and hearing about how to really build a CX program for success. And we will see you again next week.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you.